その殺気を引っ込めてくれねえか。ここでやろうってんだ。別に構わねえけどな。
Hello guys, welcome back to another Nioh 2 guide video, and today we're going to be taking a look at advanced techniques specifically around Onmyo, Ninjutsu, Yokai abilities and how to tie them together in combos via animation cancelling. So to jump straight in, we'll start with the most basic and well-known techniques as we work our way towards the more complex variations. That way we can sort of get used to what we've already learned to more easily understand the slightly harder stuff. Now, to get through this as efficiently as possible, I won't be wasting time explaining what you should already know in regards to beginner and intermediate techniques, or explaining how specific jutsu works. For example, if we start with ninjutsu feathers, we won't go in depth on how ninjutsu feathers work, but we are going to be explaining how, as an experienced user of feathers, you can take them to the next level in terms of advanced techniques. So before we do anything else, the first thing we need to understand is animation cancels. Now, when it comes to feathers, there are generally three forms of cancels that you'll be using, two of which are quite commonly understood, not particularly advanced. They are the burst cancel and the yokai ability cancel. Both these inputs can cancel out of many, if not most, attack animations in the game. However, the third form of cancelling is definitely the advanced of the three, and that is the key pulse cancel. All three of these cancels have a specific reason behind wanting to use them. For example, if you were just spamming feathers and nothing else, then the most efficient form of cancel would simply be the burst counter cancel, as it's fast, it uses little anima, and if you're using a feral spirit, it also allows you more mobility while spamming feathers. There is also a hidden technique to this form of cancel, which we will get to a little bit later. For the yokai ability cancel, this is the cancel you'll be using when you want to include jutsu into a combo, where you can chain both jutsu, yokai abilities and melee skills together. The key pulse cancel is definitely the more difficult to pull off effectively, and admittedly most players who just like to run a strong build and smash the game won't be utilizing this that much, but tech players who specifically like the more technical side of the combat will want to master this technique, as it certainly allows for more quote unquote flexing if you like to play that way, or if you like making cool clips and stuff. One last thing before I explain how I perform certain techniques: there will be certain language that I use to help explain it, and some of it's just completely made up for the sake of ease. So I like to use the term launch window to explain the point in which a jutsu animation becomes active, and what that means is the point in which you cancel but the attack continues, because it's of course possible to cancel an ability before it becomes active and then nothing will happen with it. So obviously the objective here is to learn the timing of each jutsu where you can cancel just at the point of launch where the attack animation continues, but your character is able to recover from the animation, allowing you to take another action. So you can cancel just at the point of launch where you've cancelled as fast as possible while still being able to send out the ability. So first, let's take a look at the burst counter cancel, specifically on feathers. On the surface, there isn't much to explain with this one because it's very simple. You are just activating a burst counter at the point of launch on your feathers. This you will probably already know. However, there is one simple technique that most people tend to overlook, and this technique is one reason why you might want to carry feathers even if you don't play a ninjutsu build, and that is the feather counter. And that is simply activating feathers when you actually perform a burst counter in any situation where you would burst counter anyway. And that's pretty funny because most people who use burst counter to cancel feather animations, they never think to use feathers before using the burst counter to actually counter an enemy's attack. And as mentioned, this works on any build regardless of your investment in ninjutsu. It's essentially a free status application for you to apply confusion whilst simultaneously punishing an enemy via a burst counter. Keep in mind you can also synergize your feathers to restore anima by taking cores or spirits that have anima on ninjutsu hit, and so in these situations where you're getting free feathers that are just simply automatically placed into a thing you were already going to do, for example burst counter or a yokai ability, you're going to get free anima from doing that. So speaking of yokai abilities, let's look at the yokai ability cancel. Again, on the surface it's extremely simple, just hitting a yokai ability to cancel out of feathers, but you can do so much more from this basic setup, especially if you have something like sloth or ninjutsu. But even if you don't, using lightning feathers will slow the enemy anyway, and even if you don't use lightning, the free status application and damage really becomes OP in what I'm about to show you. So for these examples we are using the Ippon core, mostly because it provides stagger / mild stun that allows you to ready your next attack in the combo sequence. I'll also mostly be using sword, as sword has access to quick draw attacks, which is another perfect example of bypassing animations through cancels. For example, we can ninja feathers cancel into Ippon yokai ability. This automatically sheaths our weapon, which means we can immediately EI quick draw. That there is already an advanced but also very basic example of a cancel chain. Feathers, Ippon, EI. Now of course that's a basic example, you can get a lot more crazy. For example, if we tie everything we've learnt so far together, we can feather burst counter into weapon switch hatchets boulder breaker, into wild surge 2, into Ippon, into weapon switch sword EI. And that's just utilizing what we've talked about so far, which is just the tip of the iceberg mechanically. We could fit another 20 things into that combo regarding other jutsu and yokai abilities. And we will try and do stuff like that a little bit later in the video. But in terms of the weapon switching you saw me do there between the hatchets and the sword, those techniques are covered in the advanced combat videos, which are more tied around weapon animation cancels. So I advise you go and watch those if you haven't. But finally, in terms of the 3 specific cancels, we'll take a look at the key pulse cancel next. This one is kind of challenging. It only works with certain attacks on certain weapons. So if you remember the launch window term I was using earlier, that would apply more than ever in these examples, because when you use a melee attack, depending on the attack, your key pulse animation will end sooner or later depending on the skill. And if you're using a skill where the key pulse animation starts early, meaning you can key pulse before the attack animation has fully ended, then you're not going to be able to enter a feather animation and cancel it via a key pulse before hitting the launch window of the feather animation. Because when you try and key pulse to cancel the feathers, it's too late. The key pulse animation is already gone. However, certain melee attacks have a delay on the key pulse, so you can come out of the attack animation, hit feathers, and then the key pulse window is still there from the original melee attack, so you can then key pulse out of the feathers animation. For example, on hatchets, the mid stance quick attack is very flexible for this, so I can mid stance quick attack, feathers, then key pulse, and then work in whatever combo I want. I haven't tested this on all of the weapons because honestly I don't use this technique that much. It's mostly for flexing, but I can say that fists are definitely one of the better weapons to use, because almost every attack and active skill on the fists can transition into a feathers key pulse cancel, and I'll try to play some examples on screen. So yeah, the key pulse cancel definitely takes the most practice, and it's the one you'll need to spend a lot of time with in the dojo, but equally it's also the one I would tell you to worry about the least, because it's not the most practical, but it is definitely advanced and can open up a lot of tech potential if you intend on using it as part of your main toolkit. So now the basic cancels out of the way, we'll move on to Onmyo, and more specifically Guardian Spirits, including one of my favourite techniques, which is the Spirit Switch, which utilizes your second Guardian Spirit. And if you don't know, you can switch your second Guardian Spirit in at any time mid-combat by simply pressing right bumper, right trigger and left trigger. So on PS4 that would be R1, R2 and then L2. You don't want to press them all at the same time. You want to get into the habit of holding R1 and R2, then tapping L2. This will make sense when you start to practice it for yourself. It's quite easy to fumble the input if you press all 3 at the same time. Now, Guardian Spirits in general are an important part of your build. Obviously they come with their own stats, and the 3 cores that you place into them are not only essential to your build, but at least one of them is going to be an integral part of your playstyle simply for its yokai ability. Now, it's not particularly advanced to switch to a secondary spirit in itself. Many people know that there is an advantage to your secondary spirit beyond its fixed stat. You can of course place unique soul cores in there, for example ones that can buff you such as Nepepo, Yamanba, etc. What I actually like to do if I'm not using my second spirit offensively is take the elemental Oni B soul cores for each element, so I can imbue my weapon with whatever element I want and then just switch back to my main spirit. But again, this is an advanced guide, so let's talk about some cool techniques. One of my favourite Onmyo skills is Guardian Spirit Talisman. There are times where I sacrifice all of the stats on a Guardian Spirit simply for the Guardian Spirit's ability when you use a Guardian Spirit Talisman. For example, there are several spirits that provide staggers, stuns, unique effects, which we'll go over in more detail later, but one of the coolest that we'll talk about now is Genbu. What Genbu does is sends yokai. Doesn't really work as well on humans, but will send yokais into the air for a good couple of seconds, and this includes bosses. I don't think I need to explain why that's useful, but let's start simple. So in the footage earlier in the video, you mostly saw me using Severing Spin as a follow-up to Genbu. Aside from being surrounded by enemies, Against single targets, that actually wouldn't be the best skill to use in that situation. I mostly just used it in the footage because it looks cool, and I don't find much more use for it outside of being able to completely lock an enemy down with Genbu. If you wanted a practical sword skill to use from Genbu, then I would recommend Blue Moon. This is because not only does Blue Moon have a long animation where you're just standing there with no hyper armor, but it also gives you an attack buff which you can then use to empower your finisher, which in this case would be your highest single hit burst damage skill. So for this example, EI Quick Draw. And so we're going to start with an Ippon Yokai ability stun, Spirit Switch into Genbu, Guardian Spirit Talisman, Sword Blue Moon into EI Quick Draw. Now let's show that again, but instead of naming the skills, I'll name the effects. So Stun into Crowd Control, into Empowerment, into Empowered Finisher. See where we're going with this? Now of course this works with any weapon. All weapons will have some kind of big damage skill that takes a second to activate. For example, one of my favourites for pure satisfaction has to be Lumber Chop on Axe, and to be honest the results just speak for themselves. So now let's try and get a little bit more complicated and tie a bunch of things together. So in this example, we'll use a nice combo that can start at range and allow you to gap close when you're ready. Keep in mind this was for demonstration purposes, so the build I was running in the footage that I recorded wasn't optimized. For this to really be optimized, you'd want fire feathers instead of lightning feathers in this combo, because then you would be able to proc literally every elemental debuff you can on a target, including purity, before you've even landed a melee hit. Also keep in mind, and this is important, when using two different Guardian Spirit Talismans in a row, the second one will cancel the active effects of the first one if it requires an animation. And what I mean by this is, if you use say Ho-Oh, which is going to place Purity AoE on the floor, then switch to Genbu and use a Guardian Spirit Talisman, the AoE on the floor from Ho-Oh will still remain because they're not part of an ongoing animation. But if you were to use it whilst the birds were still in the sky, then those birds would disappear. So another example would be something like the Sahaya Guardian Spirit. This actively shoots projectiles, and if you were to summon Genbu with a Guardian Spirit Talisman, then Sahaya would disappear, cancelling it because that's an active animation. So if you want to use something like Sahaya, you just need to space out the time between using both Guardian Spirit Talismans, which is what I've done with this combo. So yeah, again, just remember to use fire feathers if you want to mimic this combo, but remember this is just an example, it's not something I would expect you to mimic. The idea is you'll be creating your own combos and just using this as an example of what's possible. So we have our Sahaya as our main spirit, Genbu as our second spirit, and on our main spirit we have our soul cores of Ippon, Lightning God, and Fuki. From range we're going to cast feathers, cancel it with Fuki, cast Sahaya Guardian Spirit Talisman, cancel with Lightning God, which is going to take us in. Then we're going to Spirit Switch to Genbu, Guardian Spirit Talisman, big slow charge melee attack of your choice, and from here it's all you. You of course have Ippon to stun the enemy at any time if it wants to fight back, if it's not already dead. Now obviously this is just one example of the way you can tie Ninjutsu, Onmyo, Yokai abilities and melee combat together in one crazy seamless combo that applies all elemental statuses including purity, with multiple forms of crowd control, allowing you to freely use your melee attacks. And my intention with showing you this is for you to be able to create your own combos, and you can create much longer combos than this. Of course you can create combos that can last a whole 30 seconds. There's so much depth in terms of the things that can be synergized with each other, and I'm sure if you spend a lot of time in the dojo experimenting, you'll be able to come up with some really crazy stuff that suits you. Now if I were you, I'd start with the Guardian Spirits because they all have unique effects. Not all of them are for combos. I'll mention the ones you'll want to take a look at. So starting from the top, my personal favorites would be Hayobishin. Hayobishin has one of the coolest Guardian Spirit attacks. It's like a double stagger effect. If it lands in the perfect position where the panther will appear, swipe the enemy, this will stagger them once, and then it detonates this crazy cluster of mines around itself that explode, dealing burning damage and gives a secondary stagger. So when you combine this with something like Genbu, you can just perma-lock the enemy, which is why I included that meme clip of me using the bombs. I in no way advise that you try and play that way, but it was just a perfect example of how you can just simply lock an enemy down, depending what it is. So in that clip I'm just cycling between Guardian Spirit Talisman, Enhanced Shrapnel Bomb, Guardian Spirit Talisman over and over and over again, and I'm simply switching spirits after each bomb. So Spirit Talisman, bomb, Spirit Switch, Spirit Talisman, bomb, Spirit Switch, Spirit Talisman, bomb, over and over. And you'll see that Onmyo just can't do anything. It's completely shut down. So yeah, Hyobition is a great spirit for spirit tech. Then of course we have Genbu. Atlas Bear actually is really good when you can land it. It's just really hard to land it. You'll miss it more often than not, which can be frustrating. But when it does land, it has a really meaty stagger, and on humans can literally make them face plant the floor. So it's nice if you can get it to land. Yotogarasu, another favourite, again not as consistent against some of the bigger enemies. Sometimes they'll just ignore it, but when it does work, it doesn't just stagger, it will full on flip the enemy 180 degrees, which is a pretty cool effect. And it does come with the bonus in its stats of melee damage versus scorched, which is really nice, seeing as pretty much any Onmyo tech setup is going to be applying all elements anyway, and even if you're not, just using the spirit's ability will cause burning. So Tenjin, one of the best DPS guardian spirits in the game if you play a pure Onmyo caster. It cycles randomly between 3 elements, but the damage is absolutely insane. So definitely worth a look for pure casters. Keep in mind you need to be in melee range to use it, so pair it with yokai abilities that can stun, stagger and gap close. Mizuchi is decent, but very much dependent on your playstyle or weapon. I personally think it pairs really nice with hatchets, as Mizuchi does a multi-stagger, although very small staggers, but enough to allow you time to prepare a charged throw. It also comes with fairly nice stats with defense on Amrita absorption, anima bonus, water attack and saturation accumulation. Finally, Sahaya, which we've already talked about. It's not as good as Ho-Oh if you're running a purity build, but from a tech perspective, the fact that it can fire a sustained volley of projectiles from range really opens it up for a lot of cool options. So keep in mind guys, this is all just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what is actually possible. There are so many other things that I haven't covered simply because I still haven't explored all that's possible enough to give much more of a guide on it. For example, there are things like infinite loops, like what you saw me do to Saito, and this was achieved by using a life seal talisman so he couldn't recover his ki, getting him to a ki depleted state, and then just chaining Sign of the Cross and Aberrant Soldier yokai ability. By the way, full credit, this technique specifically I saw on someone else's channel, and that was Batman VK on YouTube, so shout out to them. I do encourage you to check out all the YouTubers who don't seem to get a lot of attention. People seem to gravitate towards big channels that have OP builds and tend to neglect actually learning the mechanics of the game. And there's a lot of channels out there from smaller YouTubers that offer exactly that, so I do encourage you to go and find them. And anything you learn that you think is pretty effective or unique, I also encourage you to share it with others. If there's one thing I want people to get from my videos, it's to encourage the player base to really explore all of the depth that the combat system has to offer and have fun with it. Not everything in this game is about grinding on the hardest difficulty within max gear using a spammy one button build. Anyway guys, I think that's all I have for you today. I'm not sure what will be next. I think I'm totally done with depths, to be honest. I think the furthest I got was level 30, and I was farming that 26 to 30 bracket over and over with different builds, trying to come up with a nice new build for you guys that you could use to defeat depths essentially, but nothing really felt strong enough for me to be able to advertise it as such. And after Team Ninja decided to completely obliterate my last video into irrelevance with the patch changes, I honestly don't think it's worth the stress, especially if they're just going to make changes that make my next video redundant. So for now, I think I'll stick with the advanced guides, the montages, and if I do make another build, it would definitely be something more ubiquitous and not exclusive to people that are at the very high end of the game, especially now that it's released on PC and there are a lot of new players, which hopefully is exactly what this video was, hopefully useful to everyone. With that said, if you have any questions, you're welcome to leave them down in the comments and I will do my best to respond to you directly. Otherwise, you're also able to join our Discord where our friendly members can help you out, or you can just team up and co-op or just generally hang out. Links will be provided in the description and pinned comment. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up as that really helps me out, and if you're not already subscribed, consider doing so for more Nioh 2 content coming soon. Okay guys, until next time, stay safe and take care.